Hi, this is Aiden, and this is my presentation. The four ideas I took away from this was making writing enjoyable, uh, creating an opportunity to express creatively, how to grade assignments, and how to approach my teaching statement slash philosophy. The first two about expressing creativity and making writing enjoyable kind of go hand in hand because it's easier to become creative when you're allowed the freedom to express yourself with limited restrictions and especially in the collegiate aspect or even high school when you have standards you have to meet. It can limit the amount of opportunity you have to kind of let your mind go crazy and do all sorts of different things and to allow yourself to go the routes that might not be super traditional, but you don't face consequences for doing it, and it becomes potentially more interesting and thought-provoking because of that. I think it's important to the classroom because in the society we live in, especially when our country doesn't excel in literacy, I think it's important just to have people writing, and maybe that'll also encourage them to read later. When it comes to grading, I understand that there are certain standards I would have to meet as an educator, but that does not mean that I can't go expand on that a little bit and potentially offer free writing opportunities that gives the students a separate opportunity to express themselves in different ways. And then my teaching statement and philosophy are pretty simple. It's basically my ideologies, which is to encourage students to enjoy the learning, not to force it down them and make them hate it. I want to make an environment that's inclusive and also thought-provoking and encouraging creativity and not to hinder them with lots of requirements that they may have to meet later on in life. Three quotations that I found really insightful were A Culture of Support by Peter Elbow. This was him discussing his free writing that he gave outside of the classroom when he was teaching at, I want to say UMass. This gave opportunities to him and his students to be allies instead of being student-professor relations. And Peter Elbow basically described it as the students having the opportunity to not try and please Peter Elbow, but to allow them to think for themselves and write what their thoughts were truly thinking about. And it allowed him to be more of a mentor instead of a authoritative figure in these kids' lives. The second one is from Umberto Eco. Every text is a lazy machine asking the reader to do some of its work. This was from the Zoom meeting that Carol Jago had with a few educators in the community. Basically, this was her way of encouraging the students to try and decipher what the text means and not just looking at the words as words. She also understands that sometimes as a student it's hard to get into the mind space to be able to try and think outside of the box and not to just see the words as a bunch of mumbo, but it's important to allow them to encourage them in a direction that allows them to decipher things in a way that might mean something to them that's not necessarily a standard that's told by somebody. This last one is, it's not about your writing, it's about what your writing caused, again from Peter Elbow. I think this one was the most inspiring to me because basically he's saying you can write whatever you want, but if it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't really have a purpose. And so I believe this is Peter Elbow's way of trying to encourage students to write something that's meaningful to them, maybe not meaningful to the rest of the world, because in that sense it does have a very strong and powerful meaning in some instances. I also made two connections to this class. One of them was classroom environment. I believe I have a pretty unique educational background. In high school, I did project-based learning, which is basically math and science merged together, and then English and history. So if I read about the Odyssey, maybe we'd discuss Homer, and in math and science, we would do calculations, and then we'd try them out in science and see if it worked out. For me, it was pretty beneficial because I needed extra support and I needed somebody to encourage me, and a lot of the hands-on material made it more exciting as it was because it didn't feel like classroom work. And so I think understanding that some students need different techniques rather than the traditional classroom setting is important. And then my last one is the types of writing. For example, I'm a free writer. I like to kind of just put everything on the page and then come back later and organize it, make sure it's coherent, and then also maybe coming back and looking if stuff didn't make sense or if I can add on to things. But I understand that some people also need to structure their paragraphs before, and understanding that people write differently, just like how people learn differently, is very important in my classroom. And then finally, my one lingering question is, how do I praise students who are still falling behind? Who are still falling behind when they're putting in the work and effort and it's just not working out. I believe the best way to offer more support is probably to put them in a situation that offers more support, but I don't know how to encourage somebody who's still not doing great. I feel like from my own experience, it's pretty disheartening, and I never really felt motivated, except that I was getting a constant pat on the back saying, at least you're trying. So I don't know. I would like to learn how to be able to encourage somebody who's trying their best but still not succeeding into continuing to try their best. But here's my citations page, and this was my presentation. Thank you.